Disgraced and utterly alone at the altar, Elena fought to hold back tears as her groom stepped away in disgust at her handmade gown, drawing merciless mockery from the elite society guests. That ridicule was abruptly silenced, however, when the heavy oak doors of the cathedral burst violently open, revealing a fleet of armored black SUVs encircling the church. Elena Voss never belonged in Sebastian Hartwell's world, and his family made sure she felt it every single day. At 27, Elena was a devoted emergency room nurse at Eastport General Hospital, accustomed to grueling 12-hour shifts, the sharp sting of antiseptic, and the relentless urgency of preserving lives. Sebastian, on the other hand, was the heir to Hartwell Maritime Group, an old money empire with estates in Westport, Connecticut, and bank accounts quietly tucked away in the British Virgin Islands. To Elena, Sebastian had initially been captivating, a whirlwind courtship that felt like something out of a fairy tale. But to Margaret Hartwell, Sebastian's mother, Elena was a parasite, a gold digger, a nobody trying to infiltrate the city's elite circles. The wedding was set at St. Catherine's Cathedral in Westport, a breathtaking Gothic structure that had witnessed generations of inherited wealth. Outside, the ocean breeze swept against the procession of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces delivering the 400 invited guests, executives, politicians, and socialites. Inside the bridal suite, Elena stared at her reflection, her stomach coiling into a tight, painful knot. She wasn't wearing a couture Elie Saab or a coveted Valentino bridal gown. Just 3 days prior, her immaculate, painstakingly saved $3,000 silk dress had been deliberately ruined when Margaret's assistant poured an entire tray of blackberry champagne cocktails over it. Margaret had offered a hollow, icy apology, claiming there was no time to find a replacement and that Elena would simply have to make do. Sebastian had merely shrugged, telling Elena, "Mother is overwhelmed. Don't blow this out of proportion." With no savings left and no time, Elena had turned to a desperate solution. She had tailored her late grandmother's wedding gown. It was a delicate, vintage ivory dress crafted from antique Brussels lace and modest cotton lining. Elena had spent 2 sleepless nights at her vintage Bernina sewing machine, reshaping the hem and cinching in the waist. To her, it carried profound sentimental meaning. To the billionaires seated in the pews, it was a glaring symbol of her poverty. It looks precisely like what it is," Vivian, Sebastian's younger sister, sneered as she swept into the suite, adjusting her own $5,000 diamond necklace. "A thrift store catastrophe. Are you seriously walking down our aisle in that thing?" Elena swallowed the ache in her throat, raising her chin defiantly. "It belonged to my grandmother. It means everything to me, Vivian." Vivian scoffed, spinning on her designer heels. "Just don't drift too close to the floral centerpieces. We spent $80,000 for the white orchids and I'd hate for your bargain bin cotton to ruin the entire aesthetic." When the heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary finally parted and the pipe organ swelled with the bridal processional, Elena drew a deep breath. She had no father to escort her down the aisle, so she walked alone. She clutched her bouquet of simple white roses, her knuckles pale. As she stepped into the magnificent vaulted nave, the murmurs began. They weren't discreet. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, cruelty was a spectator sport. Elena could sense the contempt rippling throughout the pews. Women in feathered fascinators leaned into their husbands, concealing their smirks behind manicured fingers. "Is that cotton? Good heavens, it looks like a nightgown. I heard Margaret refused to pay for a dress. Can you blame her?" Sebastian looks absolutely mortified. Elena's eyes fixed on Sebastian standing at the altar. She expected to find a reassuring smile, a look of adoration that would dissolve the icy judgment of the room. Instead, she saw a man shifting uneasily in his tailored chiton tuxedo. His jaw was locked tight. His face was flushed with shame. He wasn't looking at Elena's eyes. He was staring at the fraying lace near her collarbone. When Elena finally arrived at the altar, the silence in the cathedral was absolute. The priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony. But the tension was thick enough to shatter. "Dearly beloved," the priest's voice resonated off the stained glass. We are gathered here today to unite Sebastian and Elena. Stop, a voice cut through the silence. The word struck like a whip crack. Elena gasped, whipping her head around. Margaret Hartwell rose from the front pew, her posture rigid, her gaze dripping with absolute contempt. "Mother, please," Sebastian hissed beneath his breath, though he made no move to stop her. "I will not sit here and watch my son destroy the greatest opportunity of his life," Margaret announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent cathedral. She gestured dismissively at Elena. "Look at her, Sebastian. Look at what she chose to wear to the most significant society occasion of the decade. She didn't even make an effort. She is making a mockery of our family's legacy. She looks desperate. She is desperate." Laughter, low, savage, and merciless, rippled through the crowd. Some guests actually pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. Elena's heart shattered against her ribs. Hot tears pricked her eyes. She turned to Sebastian, her voice a desperate whisper. "Sebastian, say something. Stand up for me." Sebastian glanced at his mother, then at the sea of judging billionaires, and finally at Elena. His eyes were cold, completely stripped of the man she thought she loved. "She's right, Elena," Sebastian muttered, retreating from the altar, physically distancing himself from her. "I can't go through with this. I have investors in these pews. The board of directors is watching. I told you to look respectable, and you show up dressed like a servant. I cannot tie my family's legacy to this." Elena felt the ground vanish from beneath her feet. "Sebastian, it's my grandmother's gown. Your mother destroyed mine. Enough." Sebastian barked, his voice amplified through the microphone. "The wedding is cancelled. I sincerely apologize to my family and our guests for this humiliation." The laughter swelled louder. A bridesmaid, one of Vivian's privileged friends, deliberately collided with Elena, causing her to drop her bouquet. "Oops," the girl giggled. "Time to escort the trash out." Elena stood motionless, utterly forsaken at the altar. The man she adored had just discarded her like rubbish over a piece of fabric. The elite crowd sneered, pointing and whispering, swallowing her in a wave of degradation. She shut her eyes, wishing the marble floor would crack open and consume her entirely. And then, the heavy reinforced oak doors at the rear of the cathedral exploded open with a thunderous, ear-splitting crash. The cruel laughter died instantly. Outside the cathedral, the deafening thunder of high-performance engines consumed the church organ. Four matte black Range Rover SVRs and 2 armored Maybachs had aggressively jumped the curb, blockading the church's entrance. The sheer menace of the vehicles sent a shockwave of terror through the elite crowd. Before anyone could cry out, a dozen men flooded into the cathedral. They didn't resemble ordinary wedding crashers. They were towering, silent, and lethal. Dressed in immaculate, tailored Cesare Adelini suits, their eyes concealed behind dark sunglasses, and the distinct outline of holstered firearms pressed against their jackets. With chilling efficiency, they dispersed, securing the heavy side exits and barricading the main entrance. "What is the meaning of this?" Douglas Hartwell, Sebastian's father, erupted, rising to his feet. "I'm calling the commissioner of police. Do you have any idea who I am?" One of the men in black merely fixed his gaze on Douglas, a hollow, vacant stare that made the billionaire swallow his words and quietly sink back into his seat. Then the temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, echoed across the marble floor. Marco Reyes stepped into the light of the stained glass. He was a legend whispered about in terrified tones in the boardrooms of Chicago and New York. Marco Reyes wasn't merely powerful, he was the apex predator of the Eastern Seaboard. He commanded the ports, the unions, and the underground networks. He was a man who dismantled empires with a single phone call and erased enemies with a quiet word. Standing 6 feet 3 inches with razor-sharp features, dark piercing eyes, and a pale scar cutting through his left eyebrow, Marco radiated an aura of pure, unyielding authority. He wore a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than most people earned in a decade. An Audemars Piguet royal oak gleamed on his wrist. Douglas Hartwell went completely white. He seized his wife's arm, his voice unraveling. "Margaret, not a word. Stay quiet. That's Reyes." Sebastian, previously so arrogant and consumed with appearances, now looked like a terrified child. He backed away from the altar, nearly stumbling over the priest. Marco disregarded the billionaires. He disregarded the trembling groom. He disregarded the armed guards securing the perimeter. His dark eyes were trained entirely on one person, Elena. Elena stared at him, her breath catching in her chest. She recognized him. Exactly 14 months ago, during a frantic blackout in the Eastport General ER, a man had been rushed in through the loading dock, hemorrhaging from a severed femoral artery, the result of a brutal syndicate ambush. The hospital systems had gone dark. The other physicians had panicked, but Elena hadn't. She had clamped the artery bare-handed, operating in complete darkness with only a flashlight gripped between her teeth, drenched in his blood. She asked no questions. She passed no judgment. She simply fought with everything she had to keep his heart beating. Before he was quietly removed from the hospital by his men before sunrise, Marco had seized her blood-stained wrist. "I owe you my life, little bird," he had murmured, his voice rough with pain. And Marco Reyes never walks away from a debt. She hadn't crossed paths with him since, until now. Marco walked steadily down the aisle, the sea of terrified aristocrats parting for him like the Red Sea. When he reached the altar, he halted in front of Elena. The intimidating, ruthless phantom of the underworld looked down at her with a tenderness that defied all reason. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently intercepting a tear that slid down her cheek. "They have no conception of what they're mocking, Elena," Marco said, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the dead-silent cathedral. He removed his bespoke suit jacket. With immense care, he draped it around Elena's trembling shoulders, shielding her handmade lace gown from the predatory gaze of the room. The jacket carried the scent of expensive cologne and rain-soaked earth, and it instantly made her feel protected. Marco slowly turned his gaze to look at Sebastian. The gentleness vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical malice that made Sebastian audibly whimper. "You," Marco said, the word laced with venom. "You had a queen standing before you, and you cast her aside because a room full of court jesters laughed." I, Sebastian stammered, his knees visibly trembling. "Mr. Reyes, please, this is a private family matter." "Nothing concerning Elena is private to me anymore," Marco interrupted, advancing on Sebastian. The height disparity was staggering. Marco towered over the air. "Your family owes my syndicate $40 million from your failed maritime ventures last quarter, Sebastian. Your father has been pleading with me for an extension. I was prepared to grant it." Marco tilted his head, a dangerous smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Not anymore. I'm seizing the fleet. I'm taking the Westport properties. I'm taking everything." Margaret Hartwell let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest. Douglas buried his face in both hands. In 30 seconds, Marco Reyes had leveled the Hartwell dynasty. Marco turned his back on the ruined groom and faced Elena once more. The entire cathedral watched in paralyzed disbelief as the most dangerous man in the country gracefully lowered himself to one knee on the marble floor. Gasps swept through the cathedral. Marco reached into his vest pocket and produced a sleek, obsidian velvet box. He flipped it open and the afternoon light, catching what was nestled inside, nearly blinded those in the front row. It wasn't just a ring. It was an instrument of sheer financial supremacy. Nestled on the velvet cushion sat a flawless 12-carat vivid pink diamond flanked by 2 spear-cut white diamonds. It was a singular piece, custom crafted by a legendary Antwerp jeweler, widely regarded in the diamond world as worth upwards of $10 million. It was a ring made for royalty, not a trauma nurse. You kept me alive in the dark, Elena, Marco said quietly, looking up into her wide, stunned eyes. You asked for nothing in return. For over a year, I have watched over you from the shadows, ensuring your safety. But witnessing this, he gestured toward the altar, his jaw tightening. I refuse to remain in the shadows any longer. He took her left hand, his thumb tracing softly over her knuckles. Let me be the shield you deserve. Marry me, Elena. Let me give you my empire, my protection, and my devotion. Say yes, and I swear no one in this city will ever dare to mock you again. Elena stood perfectly still. The weight of the $10 million diamond sparkled before her. Every pair of terrified eyes in the room watched her every breath as she grasped that her entire life was about to transform forever. The stillness inside St. Catherine's Cathedral was so profound that the quiet ticking of Marco Reyes' Audemars Piguet could be heard by those standing nearest to the altar. Elena stared at the brilliant 12-carat pink diamond shimmering in the obsidian velvet box. Her mind spiraled, struggling to absorb the impossible turn of events. Less than 10 minutes ago, she was the punchline of a vicious joke, discarded by a man who valued a country club membership above her heart. Now, the most feared figure on the Eastern Seaboard was kneeling at her feet, offering her the world. Elena, Sebastian stammered, lurching forward, his voice fracturing under a mixture of terror and sudden desperate calculation. He had just grasped the magnitude of his family's financial annihilation. Elena, don't do this. He's a criminal. Federal authorities have been working to build a RICO case against him for years. You can't seriously be considering this. This was all a misunderstanding. We can fix everything. Marco didn't so much as turn his head. He calmly raised 2 fingers. Immediately, an enormous man in a Cesare Adelini suit materialized from the shadows, seizing Sebastian by the collar of his chiton tuxedo and hurling him backward. Sebastian collided with a marble column, gasping for air as the enforcer's massive forearm pressed into his throat. Keep your mouth shut, Hartwell, the enforcer growled, his hand resting deliberately on the grip of his concealed firearm. Margaret Hartwell released a muffled shriek, clutching her husband's arm. The distinguished guests in the pews, senators, hedge fund managers, and real estate magnates, shrank into their seats. These were individuals accustomed to wielding authority through attorneys and boardrooms. They had no defense whatsoever against the raw, unrestrained force of the underworld. Elena looked at Sebastian, pinned against the marble, looking utterly pathetic and diminished. Then she looked down at Marco. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on her, patient and remarkably gentle, contrasting violently with the chaos his presence had unleashed. Why? Elena whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Why go to all this effort for me? Because in a world filled with people who only look at what they can take from others, you are the only person who ever looked at me and saw a life worth fighting for, Marco replied softly, his gravelly voice meant for her ears alone. I have wealth. I have power. I have an army, but I have no peace, Elena. When you reached for me in that emergency room, when you wrestled death itself for a man you didn't even know, you gave me peace. You are worth more than every vessel the Hartwells ever owned. A tear slipped down Elena's cheek, washing away the last remnant of her heartbreak. The humiliation she had endured moments ago dissolved, replaced by a sweeping, extraordinary sense of empowerment. She no longer cared about the murmurs of the elite. She no longer cared about the gossip or their verdict. She looked at the man who had just dismantled her tormentors without a second thought. Yes, Elena said, her voice finding its strength. It echoed clearly through the vaulted ceilings of the nave. Yes, Marco. A genuine, breathtaking smile broke across Marco's stoic face. He took her left hand and, with reverence, slid the $10 million pink diamond onto her ring finger. It was substantial, cool, and a perfect fit. The brilliance of the stone caught the light of the stained glass, scattering prismatic colors across the cathedral. Marco rose to his feet, his commanding frame eclipsing everyone around him. He wrapped his arm protectively around Elena's waist, drawing her firmly against his side. He then turned his attention back to the terrified crowd, the warmth in his eyes extinguishing entirely. "Victor," Marco called out. A sharp-dressed lieutenant with a tablet stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Execute the hostile takeover of Hartwell Maritime Group," Marco ordered, his voice rolling like thunder. "Contact our source at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Anonymously forward the encrypted dossiers I handed you last night, the ones detailing Douglas Hartwell's offshore tax evasion in the British Virgin Islands and the fabricated quarterly earnings reports. Then contact Atlantic Central Bank. Call in all their margin loans. Today." Douglas Hartwell let out a choked gasp, clutching his chest. "Marco, Mr. Reyes, please. You'll obliterate 5 generations of wealth in an afternoon. You'll put us out on the street." Marco's expression remained carved from granite. "You put my future wife on display to be ridiculed. You laughed at her grandmother's memory. Be grateful I am only coming for your fortune, Douglas." Margaret, the color fully drained from her face, finally broke. The towering arrogance that had defined her entire existence crumbled. She lurched forward, practically collapsing at Elena's feet, oblivious to the fact that she was dragging her $15,000 Saint Laurent gown across the marble floor. "Elena, please," Margaret begged, dissolving into hysterics. "You are a compassionate woman. You're a nurse. You heal people. Tell him to stop. I beg you. Forgive us. The dress is beautiful. It truly is. I'm so sorry." Elena looked down at the woman who had tormented her for over a year. She felt a brief, fleeting flash of pity, but then she remembered the deliberate destruction of her gown, the sneers, and the cold abandonment at the altar. "You're right, Margaret. I do save people," Elena said quietly, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "But some infections need to be surgically removed." Marco smirked, visibly impressed. He pressed a kiss to Elena's temple. "Let's go home, little bird." Encircled by a phalanx of armed men, Marco guided Elena down the aisle. The very same aristocrats who had ridiculed her mere minutes ago now cast their gaze downward, too terrified to even make eye contact with the new queen of the East Coast Syndicate. They walked out through the heavy oak doors and into the brilliant Connecticut afternoon sunlight. Marco personally opened the heavy armored door of the lead Maybach. Elena settled into the plush leather interior, the intoxicating scent of power enveloping her as the convoy roared to life and swept away from the cathedral. Elena gazed out the tinted window, watching the Hartwell dynasty physically and metaphorically disintegrate in the rearview mirror. 6 months later, the skyline of the Chicago Harbor District shimmered against the twilight sky. Inside the penthouse office of the newly established Voss Medical Institute, Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing a set of architectural blueprints. Her life had transformed completely. Yet the core of who she was remained unshaken. She hadn't abandoned her medical calling. Instead, with the limitless backing of Marco's legitimate business holdings, she had founded a state-of-the-art trauma clinic dedicated to treating uninsured and low-income patients. She wore a sharp, tailored navy pantsuit, and on her left hand, the $10 million pink diamond caught the city lights. A soft knock on the mahogany door interrupted her thoughts. Marco walked in, shrugging off his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves, revealing the intricate ink mapped across his forearms. The ruthless kingpin of the Eastern Seaboard always softened the moment he crossed the threshold into her presence. "You're working late, Dr. Voss," Marco teased, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pressing a kiss to her neck. "Just finalizing the pediatric wing," Elena smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. "Did Victor handle the supply chain issue?" "Handled," Marco said, though a dark amusement danced in his eyes. "Speaking of which, I have a late wedding gift for you. A piece of information my men uncovered while auditing the remains of Hartwell Maritime." Elena turned around, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we were finished with them." I read in the local paper that Douglas is facing federal indictment, and they had to auction off the Westport estate. We are done with them, Marco agreed, tracing a finger softly down her cheek. But I needed you to know the full truth of why you were standing at that altar in the first place. Marco crossed to her desk and tossed a manila folder onto the glass surface. Sebastian never had any intention of marrying you, Elena. The Hartwells have been bankrupt for 2 years. They were hemorrhaging money. The only way Sebastian could salvage his family was by marrying Charlotte Whitmore, the heiress to the Whitmore banking fortune. But Charlotte wouldn't commit until Sebastian ended things with you. Elena stared at the folder, the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The ruined dress, the cruelty at the altar, it was never an accident. No, Marco said coldly. Margaret orchestrated the spilling of the drinks on your gown. Sebastian engineered the public humiliation. They wanted you to appear so pitiable, so beneath them, that discarding you at the altar would look justified to their elite peers. They wanted the narrative to paint you as a fraud, clearing the path for Sebastian to pivot to Charlotte without scandal. A cold chill traveled down Elena's spine. The sheer cruelty of it was staggering. It wasn't mere snobbery. It was a calculated, psychological execution. But you shattered their plan, Elena realized, a slow smile spreading across her face. By destroying their company before Sebastian could marry Charlotte, the Whitmore family withdrew. No one wants to merge with a bankrupt, federally indicted family. Exactly, Marco grinned, a dangerous, wolfish expression. Sebastian is currently managing a mid-level logistics warehouse in New Jersey. His mother is living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. They got precisely what they deserved. Elena looked at the man standing before her. The world called him a monster, a criminal, a mob boss, but to her, he was the most formidable protector she could have ever imagined. He hadn't merely rescued her from humiliation. He had dismantled the corrupt machinery that tried to crush her. Thank you, Elena whispered, stepping into his arms. I told you, little bird, I don't leave debts unpaid, Marco murmured, resting his forehead against hers. Now, we have a plane to board. Our real wedding begins in 48 hours. 2 days later, on the private, heavily guarded shores of Positano, Italy, Elena finally received the wedding she truly deserved. There were no sneering socialites. There were no contemptuous aristocrats. The guest list consisted solely of Marco's most trusted inner circle, loyal men and women who respected Elena not for her bank account, but for the fierce, unshakable spirit that had tamed their boss. And as the sun descended over the shimmering Italian waters, casting a golden warmth across the villa, Elena walked down the aisle. She didn't wear Elie Saab or Valentino. She wore her grandmother's vintage cotton and Brussels lace gown. However, Marco had secretly flown in master tailors from Milan to restore it. They hadn't altered the original design, but they had reinforced the delicate lace and hand-stitched hundreds of tiny flawless diamonds into the bodice, making the humble fabric shimmer like a midnight sky dusted with stars. As Marco waited for her at the altar, looking devastatingly striking in a classic black tuxedo, his eyes filled with absolute reverence. He didn't see a cheap dress. He saw the woman who had braved the darkness to save his life, standing before him as his equal, his partner, and his queen. They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of white roses, far removed from the toxic elite of Chicago. And when Marco finally drew Elena in for a kiss, sealing their union, a roar of genuine joy and celebration erupted from the crowd. They had tried to bury Elena Voss in humiliation, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. She was a survivor. And when she fell into the darkness, she didn't merely find a way out. She found the king of the underworld. And together, they built an empire all their own. Did Elena make the right choice leaving a billionaire for a mafia kingpin? If you love this story of ultimate revenge and true loyalty, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more gripping real-life storytelling. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What would you have done in Elena's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.